Hello, and thank you for watching another edition of ARFCOM News. Watching the decrepit and decaying legacy media try to come to terms with any new trend is hilarious in that awkward kind of way that Steve Carell owns so well. Remember when they were all tricked into reporting that the OK sign was a racist hand signal? While legacy media may use a young, attractive person to Ron Burgundy their way through a report, the people writing the copy and making the decisions are often over-the-hill boomers with no ability to perceive satire. They don't remotely grok internet culture, and they've probably never seen a Family Guy episode. So their reports on the Boogaloo are cringy stabs at white nationalism. They'll track down one guy with the Civil War second place award in a crowd of thousands and declare it to be some kind of Klan rally. They're bending over backwards to paint the gun rights movement in general as racists, and they're trying to use jokes about the Boog to support the claim. A lot of folks have pointed out the misunderstanding is so ridiculously obstinate that it's clearly just targeted propaganda intended to marginalize anybody fighting for gun rights. Now, obviously, most of these so-called journalists are gun control advocates who know next to nothing about guns, so it's fair to argue that they're doing it on purpose. But an old saying goes, never attribute to malice that which can be explained by incompetence. I honestly believe that most of the pearl clutching is simple incompetence that is only magnified by their bias. And I think it's best illustrated with this attempt to explain the origin of the phrase by relating it to the movie Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo. Sure, that movie does get referenced quite a lot, but the references started in meme culture and gaming communities as a way to signify an unwanted or awful sequel. While many of us feign excitement for Civil War II Electric Boogaloo, most of us understand how dark and terrifying that would really be. Jokes about the Boog are a lighthearted but at the same time sobering approach to very real concerns about what path our country will take if aloof politicians continue to plod methodically down the path toward confiscation. No matter where you stand on the issue, you have to be aware of the fact that there are a number of people in this country who are willing to bleed in order to defend gun rights. The Boog meme is just a way to confront the horrifying prospect of another civil war in a way that doesn't make a man want to cry. The fact that the misunderstanding of the legacy media is simply a result of gross incompetence is supported by the fact that they even go on to claim that the Boogaloo is just like the OK sign. Oblivious to the fact that they were duped in the first place, they claim the OK sign actually was racist and that white nationalists denied the association. As you likely know, that's 180 degrees opposed to what actually happened. 4chan initiated the hoax, which the legacy media swallowed hook, line, sinker, bobber, rod, reel, and halfway to the elbow. Then white nationalists started using it ironically, and now it's become somewhat of a racist hand signal only because of the stark raving gullibility of the legacy media. So just as they created the OK sign as a racist gesture, the failing legacy media seems determined to create a civil war out of a meme intended to warn against inciting a civil war with authoritarian policies. Remember the organization Black Guns Matter that I reported on a couple of weeks ago? It's a charity that teaches safe gun handling and gun rights to inner city folks. It was founded by Maj Touré, a confirmed black man. And although BGM certainly does not discriminate, they do tend to teach mostly minorities. Normally, none of that would matter in the slightest, but in the context of this next story, it actually matters a great deal. A man attacked another man at a Bernie Sanders rally apparently over a Black Guns Matter shirt. The man who started the fight seemed to be upset because he perceived the shirt as a slight against the Black Lives Matter movement. The man who was attacked said his attacker called him racist before knocking him to the ground. While that's a pretty extreme reaction, it also isn't exactly shocking. What is surprising, perplexing even, is the fact that the man who was wearing the shirt is black, while the man who accused him of being racist is white. Now, I'm certainly not saying that black people can't be racist, but the arrogance and absolutely blind fury that it takes for a white man to lecture a black man about not being woke enough about black issues pegged my irony meter pretty hard. The white guy, who goes by Tyler, because of course he does, said he became upset when the other man booed Sanders. Sanders, for his part, prattled on during the whole attack as though unaware that anything was happening. I'm guessing it's fairly normal for the befuddled old man to be totally oblivious to events around him. Sanders is an outspoken opponent of the right of the people to keep and bear arms, but probably a little less rabid about the topic than some of the other people vying for the DNC nomination. And that raises an interesting idea. When I first started reading this story, I assumed that the guy wearing the BGM shirt was not a Sanders supporter and was only there to document the event. But his statements indicate he may indeed be a Sanders supporter.
It is vitally important for those of us who hold different views to be able to engage in a civil discourse.
We have a tendency to view most issues in the context of the left-right dichotomy. But real people in the real world don't always align with the beliefs you think they should. And that matters a great deal for our movement. Because if we can make people like the BGM man feel welcome, if we can pry gun rights away from the politicians as one of their favorite wedges, then we will have won. We could squabble about other issues, but gun rights are the most important issue to me. And not all Democrats are absolutely committed to totalitarian anti-civil rights policies. Some, like the 4 senators in Virginia who joined with Republicans to at least temporarily stop that state's ban on so-called assault weapons, are willing to stand up to the authoritarian trend popular in their party today. One of them, Chad Peterson, told Fox and Friends that he felt the bill went too far, that it banned too much, and that it wasn't fair to make felons of people who already legally owned items that would have been banned. Is it just me, or does he look like he could be Rand Paul's weird Southern cousin? Chapman said that the rally on January 20th played a big role in changing his mind. It was helpful to hear from people, and I don't want people to think, if I go to a rally or send an email or call my representative, it doesn't matter. It does matter, he said. So for all you people who have been saying that rallies and voting don't work, Peterson's statement should stand as proof that it does indeed make a difference. Now, you could argue that these politicians don't really care about gun rights and they're only doing it to keep their seats. And you'd be absolutely right. But I'm okay with that. Look, if you think politicians really care about your rights, I'm sorry I have to be the one to tell you that unicorns aren't real and most politicians on both sides of the aisle don't care about your rights. I don't care if they are red team or blue team or what promises they make. The only thing that really matters is how they vote. If a massive rally and implicit threat of violent insurrection, not to mention explicit threat of noncompliance, convinces them to vote the way we want, that's still a win. Last week, we told you about an Arizona bill that would hold government offices responsible for harm that results from a no weapons policy. This week, I get to tell you about a Minnesota bill that takes that concept one step further, don't you know? HF 3051 would allow patrons to sue business owners if a patron is harmed as a result of a no weapons policy. It also clearly defines the appearance, wording, and location of no weapons signs. A person who is duly notified of the no weapons policy and who refuses to leave the premises is guilty of a misdemeanor and can be fined up to $25. This law is important because it strikes a balance between the right to be armed and the right to run your business as you please. Now, some folks act as though property rights trump all other rights, but property rights are individual rights that must be balanced against other individual rights if there's a conflict. You cannot and should not be allowed to swindle people out of their hard-earned money by lying just because you do it on private property. Likewise, you can't force someone to pray to your favorite deity before a meal or sell a person. You can search a person's belongings as a condition of entry or prohibit them from talking loudly during a performance, and all of these things represent an infringement on individual rights, but the latter two examples represent impositions that are sometimes necessary to the function of a business. That is, if a theater owner couldn't remove a loudly obnoxious patron, the other patrons wouldn't be able to enjoy the show. The central function of the business wouldn't work. So one person's individual rights are balanced against another person's individual rights. In the case of bearing concealed arms, no reasonable argument can be made that simply possessing a hidden weapon infringes in any way upon another person's rights. There is no conflict, really. So a fair point could be made that it should be illegal to ban concealed weapons in businesses open to the public. This bill falls well short of that, but I think it's a good step, and I hope that business owners and insurance companies come to terms with the fact that by prohibiting weapons, they take on some of the responsibility for the safety of patrons. So, call your Minnesota Congress critters and urge them to support HF 3051. Another pro-gun bill in Kansas, HB 2717, would make it illegal to terminate or refuse to begin a business relationship on the grounds that a business is involved in the manufacture or sale of weapons. The bill is a response to a trend over the last few years for banks to terminate business relationships with gun companies. Part of that trend can be explained by pressure from AstroTurf groups like Everytown and Moms Demand Action. But it's mostly the result of the DOJ's Operation Choke Point under Obama. Ostensibly, Operation Choke Point was supposed to advise banks on how to avoid doing business with organizations which are at high risk for fraud and money laundering. But along with the sort of businesses you might expect, like pawn shops and payday loans and literal Ponzi schemes, the DOJ was also issuing official, unofficial suggestions to banks to avoid business with companies that sell firearms and ammunition. Honestly, I'm not sure how to feel about this bill. I mean, obviously, Operation Choke Point is something the government has just no business in whatsoever. On the other hand, I don't know that I want the state of Kansas to dictate what reasons a company can have for doing business with another company. I guess what I'm saying is that I want banks to do business with gun dealers, but I don't want the state forcing them to do it. What do you think? Is it worth it to let the state have more power than they ought to just because you find the outcome to be favorable? Comment below. One bill I'm not remotely conflicted about is House Bill 2240 in Washington. It would have made it a crime to possess a magazine that holds more than 15 rounds, but it was defeated when it failed to make it out of committee by the deadline. Then, in an underhanded, slimy move, Representative Javier Valdez reintroduced the ban as part of HB 2947, a tax bill that's immune from the deadline. This new version of the bill includes a provision to buy back banned magazines. Of course, you know as well as I that you cannot buy back something that never belonged to you in the first place. And you can guarantee the state would never offer fair market value for anything they force you to surrender. Because the so-called buyback would cost money, though, it would have to be considered before a budget could be passed, and any law that would affect the budget is exempt from deadlines. This is a perfect example of the sort of shenanigans that happen in the American sausage factory. Lest you think that my bias, or perhaps your own bias, is weighing too heavily on this, I should point out that some of the sponsors of the original magazine ban have expressed their discontent with the sleazy way this is done. Representative Mike Chapman said, "I can't support this process. If we open the door and say policy bills can live on, then in essence, our deadlines mean nothing." Remember, this is a guy who wants the magazine ban. He's just standing up for what he believes is right in regard to the process. As low as my opinion of politicians is, that earns a great deal of respect in my book. So, call the representatives in Washington and urge them not to pass this awful bill. And not just if you live in Washington either. Bloomberg pays for Moms Demand Action to organize highly sophisticated robo-dialer phone banks to get everyone they can to call key politicians. They don't care if the caller is actually a constituent. Why should you? What happens in Washington is coming to Idaho if you don't stop it. So when you learn about bills like this, pick up the phone and make a call. It's a lot easier than manning an LPOP and waiting for the furries in the 87th Boog Division to relieve you. As important as phone calls are, physical presence is even more effective. So go meet with the pests infesting the state capitals and attend rallies if you can make the time. Please pause the video here and see if there's anything in your area that you can make it to. If there is, scroll down below where we'll have links to more info about each event in the description. That's that thing nobody reads that tells you what the video's about. You want street cred for when you're flexing on the pores with your dual tubes, don't you? I hope you enjoyed this edition. I sure enjoyed making it for you. If you like capitalism, and you want to help us make this endeavor successful, why not take a look at some of the rad shirts in our Teespring store? They're low calorie and almost entirely gluten-free. Thanks for watching. I love you.